Today on Styrene Modeler's Haven, I overcomplicate this model build. I play chicken with the carpet monster. I start to regret my life choices. Let's see if my sanity stays intact. Next on... So I got this Pro Modeler HELLDIVER kit pretty cheap at a model show a few years back because it didn't have its original box. But what it did have was a Wolfpack wing fold conversion set. To further go down the rabbit hole and test my mojo, I said, you know what? Let's detail the bomb bay as well with the photo etch set from Edward. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Just like most aircraft builds, I got to put these sausage fingers on the cockpit and get that installed before anything else. After clipping all the cockpit parts and sanding them down smooth, I prep everything and get it ready for the paint booth. The cockpit out of the box is pretty well detailed. To help bring out that detail, the plan is to do a lot of shadows and highlights, so I start by hitting all these parts with a flat black. For the bomb bay, to make it easier on my eyes, I spray it with a gray primer so that when I put on the photo etch, I can easily see the detail I'm going to remove and add. So jumping in head first down the rabbit hole, let's get to detailing this bomb bay. Per the instructions, the first thing I have to do is actually chisel away some of the plastic detail. This makes room for the photo etch detail that's going to take its place. Some carving, some sanding, some cutting, and finally I have all of that plastic detail removed and ready for the photo etch parts. If you've never worked with photo etch, follow along. I'm going to give you some basic tips and tricks on how to work with this medium without it getting too complicated. The best way I found to cut parts away from the fret is to put a piece of tape over that part. This will keep those pieces from flinging off the fret when you're cutting, because you typically have to press pretty hard with the X-Acto blade, and it's also a good idea to use a nice sharp blade. Now you tend to have to cut on a hard surface. I like to use a piece of glass, usually a piece of frame glass that I get from the dollar store. Make sure you have a lot of fresh blades nearby because the glass is going to dull those blades pretty quickly. Don't forget to sand off the little nubs when you cut it from the fret, and to keep that piece from bending while you're sanding, you can put a bit of tape on it. For most photo etch, all you need to bend it is a basic set of jeweler's flat pliers. For most photo etch, these pliers do a great job of bending all the parts into the shapes they need to be. But if you want to get bougie, you can get one of these photo etch bending tools. Though not completely necessary, all these little fingers and gaps between the fingers make it easier to bend, especially complicated photo etch. You simply clamp the part right where it needs to bend, use a straight edge razor or something else that can get under the piece, and bend it over. When gluing photo etch parts either to other photo etch parts or to plastic or resin or pretty much any other medium, you typically are going to use a type of CA glue. So that's a quick rundown of how I typically do photo etch parts. Depending on the situation, I can even use epoxy to glue down the parts, or even a clear coat applied with a brush on some of the more delicate photo etch parts. This is my typical loadout of tools and accessories that I use to apply photo etch parts. Tools for cutting, sawing, and sanding so I can remove any of the unwanted plastic. Both thick and thin CA glues. Different styles of tweezers. Different grades of sanding sticks. Sprue cutters. And as you've already seen, the sheet of glass, the special flat pliers, tape, razor blades, and even a small hammer if I need to kind of shape a photo etch part. And then of course we can't forget the pièce de résistance, the photo etch bender tool. And if you don't want to go cross-eyed trying to apply these little photo etch pieces, it's not a bad idea to have some kind of magnification. I added links in the description of all these tools to make it easy for you if you want to go ahead and put together your own loadout. Bending, gluing, and before you know it, I've got a nicely detailed bomb bay. Now the main reason why I even bought this Edward photo etch set for the bomb bay was because I didn't like the kit doors. They seemed kind of thick and out of scale. The Edward set gives me a 2-piece bomb bay door for each side, the outer skin and the inner framing. Once I cut the outer skin of the bay door, I need to somehow replicate the curve that's in that door just like the kit part. To make it easier to bend this brass part, I first heat it up using a lighter. By softening the brass this way, when I do finally bend it, it's not going to kink or crease in any weird way. I find a brass tube that has a similar curve to the kit part. With my sheet of glass, I place the part in between the glass and the tube, and I start rolling and pressing that brass into shape. And after taking my time massaging that part into shape, it matches the kit part curve perfectly. Using thin CA glue, I'm able to mate these two pieces together as the glue through capillary action will flow across the entire two parts. And there we have it. We go from a thick, out of scale, kind of goofy looking kit part to a nice, delicate, and in scale photo etch part. If you've never tried photo etch parts before, hopefully this quick little tutorial will motivate you on your next build. With that out of the way, we need to uniform these parts and get them caught up on the paint process with the other interior parts, and that means hitting them with a flat black. Now I'm applying a flat white on the center sections of the different cockpit parts. This will create the highlight when we finally apply the cockpit color. Speaking of cockpit colors, it's time to do just that. With the paint thinned about 70% thinner to paint, I slowly build up that cockpit color so I can control the saturation between those shadows and highlights. Moving right along, I hand paint some of the smaller details of the cockpit. When I hand paint smaller details, I like to use acrylic paints as they tend to dry a lot faster and a lot flatter. Things are moving quickly with this cockpit, and I apply a gloss clear coat so that I can get ready for the next steps of weathering. With the clear coat dry, one of the first steps I like to do for weathering a cockpit is to apply a pin wash. Using a dark brown color that I mixed with oil paints and about 90% thinner to paint, I let capillary action allow that paint to flow into all the crevices and nooks and crannies of the parts. With the pin wash dry after about 30 minutes, I go in with a slightly damped Q-tip with a little bit of thinner or even a brush and remove all the excess pin wash. With the pin wash all cleaned up, I can now hit all the parts with the flat clear coat to get it ready for the next weathering step. Now that we've further enhanced the shadows with that pin wash, we need to go and further enhance the highlights. Using acrylic paint, I mix it up a few shades lighter than the cockpit color. And then using a fine point brush, I go ahead and hand paint all the raised surfaces with that highlighted color. Between the pin wash and this highlight color, it gives the illusion or tricks the eye into thinking that light is hitting the surfaces differently and giving the illusion of depth. To further detail the cockpit, I go through my stash of decals and find different decals of dials, bezels, and placards so I can apply that to the instrument panel and other small parts of the cockpit. Since I'm positioning the canopy open, it's these small details that can sometimes make a big impact. A decal here, another random decal there. I couldn't find one complete decal that would do the instrument panel for the pilot, so instead I'm going to have to punch out individual dials and apply them one by one. So using a punch and applying these decals one by one, it is a little bit tedious, but in the end I really like the results. To prep the interior parts for more weathering, I first spray everything down with a matte clear coat. Using some light gray acrylic paint, I go back in and touch all the small little buttons and knobs to further bring out some of those details. Finally, with some silver enamel paint, I go in and dry brush all the small parts. You have to be careful here. You want to make sure that most of the silver paint has been removed from your brush. Otherwise, you're going to get way too much on the parts. The brush should almost be kind of dry to the touch, but when you apply it on the parts, it will enhance all the little corners and details and make those pieces pop. Since I sprayed a matte clear coat on the instrument panel, I have to go back in with some micro clear and apply little dots of that onto each of the dials to mimic the glass over the instruments. This kit came with photo etch buckles to make seatbelts, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Using some foil, I first cut some thin strips, and then much like threading a needle, I thread those thin strips of foil into all the different buckles. It's always best to do this with some fine point tweezers. It's almost like a little bit of a surgery. I glue these seatbelts into place, and because it's that soft foil, I can manipulate the shape to lay down into the seat and make it look like it's made out of fabric. It's delicate work, but this really makes a big impact since this is one of the most visual things you're going to see when looking into the cockpit of this model. Using some of that silver paint, I go in and paint all the buckles and latches. And then using an acrylic paint of the appropriate color, I go in and paint the foil to make it look like a fabric. Using all these simple techniques can bring all that detail out of an out-of-the-box cockpit. Switching gears, I'm finally able to assemble some of these cockpit parts into the fuselage. Little by little, I start putting this all together. And there we have it. We went from a bunch of random parts out of this kit into a fully assembled and nicely weathered cockpit. And here comes the question of how much of this is going to disappear when I put the two halves together. Hey, at least I know it's all there, and it still was a lot of fun to do. With that major milestone out of the way in this build, it's now time to tackle how I'm going to convert these wings to the folded wing set. Using the resin wings as a guide, I'm able to find where the panel line is that I need to cut from the plastic wing. Then with a razor saw, I just get to hacking and start cutting that away slowly and carefully. Having cut away the majority of the wing, now I go back and cut out the notches. I cut free the detail parts that have to go inside the wings. Then it's a little quick test fit to see how things are looking. Here's a little before and after of how the wing started and how it ends up. With everything cut correctly, I can go ahead and start gluing in the resin inserted detail piece into the interior of the wings. Making sure I get the alignment right, I first glue the bottom half of the wings to the fuselage. With everything squared up, I can now go ahead and glue in the top half of the wing. The mixture of gluing, clamping, setting everything the way it needs to be lined up, and just the whole process, I finally get these stubby little wings glued to the fuselage and the resin detail parts inserted and glued into place. I can't forget to glue in the rear stabilizers. Now there's just a lot of small parts that I have to go through, cut free, clean up, sand. Some parts I have to prep for other parts that I have to glue into. And I just sit at the bench, take my time, have a little bit of fun, and go through the process of building a model kit. With a lot of the major assembly out of the way, I can go back and concentrate on a lot of the gaps and filling in the seams of this model. The good news is this kit is actually a pretty well fit together kit. There's very few seams I need to clean up, there's not a lot of gaps, and it's going together pretty nicely. You can watch a detailed video of how I like to fill gaps and seams. I put a link in the description. I think this is about as far as I can go with filling these seams before I need to check my work, so I go ahead and start to prep the model for its first layers of primer. With all the parts ready to go, let's move this over to the paint bench and get this primed up. The first thing you want to do is wipe down all the plastic so that you got a nice clean surface for the primer to stick to. I like using 99% rubbing alcohol as it doesn't have the oils that you find in 70% alcohols that won't let the paint stick down as well. Now it's just a matter of spitting some primer on this model and seeing how good of a job I did getting rid of all those gaps and seams. Hey, this isn't too bad. For the most part, it came out pretty clean. There's a few places I'm going to have to fix some of the seams and gaps, but it won't be long before it's back at the bench for a second coat of primer. A few sprays here and there, and before you know it, this thing is ready to go for its first coat of paint. Before I can even paint the model, I gotta get the canopy ready, and in order to do that, I trim it clean and then I dip it in Future, or these days I think you can get it as Quick Shine, to get it as crystal clear as possible. With a few small details out of the way, a couple bits here, a couple bits there, I can keep moving on to getting this thing painted. Whoops, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. First, I need to glue some of the canopy pieces into place. And then, of course, I've got to mask those canopies in order to get them ready for the paint process. Alright, with all the canopies masked up, we are finally here, ready to shoot the first colors on this model. The first color out of the gun is the interior color on all the canopies, so that it'll show through the canopy clear parts and look like it's painted on the inside as well. Because I'm planning on painting this model one color, I want to do some pre and post shading so that I can differentiate some of the panels on the model. Now that the black is out of the way, I go back and I hit individual panels with a flat white. Now this next step is a little unconventional for pre-shading, but what I did is I hit the entire model with a light gray, allowing some of that pre-shading to filter through. The reason I did that is I wanted to go back and do some further pre-shading, starting with this purple color, to try to differentiate some of the panels by changing the colors. Now with the light blue, I go back and pick out individual panels and fill them in with this light blue color, with the idea being that it's going to break up that monotone look when I do finally spray the final color. I repeat this process of filling in certain individual panels with two successively darker blue colors. This should break up the panels on the plane enough when I do finally apply the final color so that it won't just look toy-like. Now with the final navy sea blue color, I slowly build up the layers of paint over all that pre-shading, watching how it kind of shows through the final color, and I get the saturation to where I like it. Now that I got it the way I want, I need to lock in all that paintwork so I don't damage it by hitting it with a gloss clear. I decide to convert the decals into pre-cut masks using my vinyl cutter so I can paint on most of the major markings. Luckily for the paint scheme I'm doing, all the major markings are one color, they're very simple, so it's pretty simple to convert these into masks and apply them onto the model. Taking my time, I get these lined up and stuck onto the model, ready to go for the paint booth. And then using a slightly off-white color at a pretty low PSI, I just spit some paint over the masks. And then I get to do one of the most satisfying and favorite parts of building a model, demasking. With all the major markings out of the way and looking the part, I have to shift gears and move towards masking some of the other parts of the model so that I can get them painted the right colors. The first color coming out of the airbrush is a light gray that I apply to the wheel wells and the bomb bay, as the next color I'm going to apply is going to be a lighter color, so I don't want it to go over too dark of a color. And now using the same interior color that I did for the cockpit, I go ahead and spray the wheel wells and the bomb bay, as well as a lot of assorted other small parts. To further enhance some of the shadows, I go back in with Tamiya Smoke and I try to spray at a very light pressure some of that paint into the nooks and crannies of all the different wheel bay and bomb bay details. Not only would this help kind of contrast the high spots and the low spots, but it also gives the area a bit of a dirty look. With all the different bits and pieces painted all the appropriate colors, I go through and I demask everything so I can get this ready to apply all the small decals that I couldn't paint on. Applying decals is always best done on a glossy surface to avoid the dreaded silvering that you would get if you tried to apply these decals on a flat surface. Using my favorite decal setter and decal solvent, I go through and apply all these little small stencil decals to further enhance the detail of this model. The last thing I do, of course, is to hit the entire model again with another coat of gloss clear to lock in those decals and to keep them from silvering. To make it look like the different panels are fading differently because of the salt air or maybe sun fade, I go through and use different shades of blue oil paints to pick out panels and slightly change the hue and the color on those panels. Working in conjunction with the pre-shading I did, this is going to further enhance that effect so that it really starts to make this look like a real aircraft. Continuing the weather process, I go back in and with Tamiya light gray panel wash, I go ahead and do a pin wash on all the recessed panel lines. This will help further break up that monotone surface and also bring out some of the finer details. Sitting at the bench, I go back and forth between applying panel washes, the oils. I even wash some of the other smaller parts and interior parts with a dark brown wash to further weather and dirty up this model. And here you can see the final results of, in conjunction with the pre-shading, using different tones of oil paints on different panels, it really starts to take this monotone color and break up that surface, making it look more like a model and less like a toy. Well, let's keep this weathering process going by first hitting the entire model and all the parts with a flat clear. And just like the cockpit, when I applied the washes to help with some of the shadows, now I have to do some of the highlights with that lighter green color. Shadows, highlights, weathering. A lot has been going on here to get this model to the point where I can start to assemble some of the smaller bits and pieces and get this model to take shape. It's down to the final assembly, but there's still a lot to do. I used some weathering powders to give the wheels a little bit of a "it's been down the runway" look, a touch of some silver paint on these landing gear, and to give these exhausts a bit of a rusty look, I used different shades of paint applied both just straight with a brush and more as a dry brush to give that graduated rusty effect. And with them looking the part, I popped those into place. A small bit here, another bit there, and now I can finally get those photo etch Bombay doors put into place. Yeah, I think I made the right decision by replacing those kit doors with these nice photo etch ones. Let's get these bombs glued in. With a good bit of the undercarriage work being done, I can start to concentrate on the landing gear so we can finally get this model on its own legs. With the landing gear in place, I can start to concentrate on the bay doors. I chip up the walkways using a silver color pencil and also go back and with a little bit of sponge technique, add a few more random chips. Using the same weathering powder I applied on the wheels, I put some of that powder on the walkways to give it a little bit more wear. There's a lot of dots of glue on this model now that are kind of shiny, so I need to tone that down by hitting the entire model with a matte clear. And with that out of the way, of course, one of my favorite parts of building a model, demasking all the canopies. Hopefully I did a good job, which means I'll have nice crisp edges. The plan is to work from the inside out so I don't accidentally break off any parts that I put on from the outside. So with that in mind, I start placing the canopy parts and any of the leftover cockpit parts I still need to place inside the cockpit. The bombs are in place, but we gotta give this HELLDIVER some teeth, so I go in and paint the guns and the wings. No World War II aircraft is complete without its aerial antenna. First, I drill in and glue some loops at the tail and on the antenna mast. With the glue drying on the loops, I take some nylon thread and I stretch that across the two loops. This is some of my favorite stuff for stretching antenna for World War II aircraft. And no Navy aircraft is complete without its landing lights. After masking off the lights, I first apply a silver undercoat. Then using transparent paint, I dry brush or pat that paint onto the silver. And now the part of this build that is really going to make this model interesting, gluing in the folded wings. I can't just use a CA glue, and of course because this is resin, I can't use a Tamiya thin glue. Instead, I have to use a 5-minute epoxy, and using a little bit of styrofoam as a brace, I epoxy those wings in. With the epoxy dry and holding those wings in firm, I can add some extra scratch detail to give that part of the wing some visual interest. We got to get the beating heart of this Helldiver in place, but before I can place the engine onto the model, I have to do a little bit of detail painting, and the photo etch set came with the fuel lines, so I got to get those painted up and then glued and formed into shape. You can almost hear the roar of that engine as it gets glued into place. Finishing off the nose of this aircraft, I get the cowl into place. I'm so close to completing this build that I've got to fight that instinct to rush to the finish line. Even though I went down the rabbit hole by adding photo etch and cutting up the wings to add those resin folded wings on, I really enjoyed this build. It gave me some interesting challenges and it never really fought me that much. My modeling friends, I present to you the 148 Pro Modeler Helldiver. Subscribe, and let me know what you thought about this build down in the comments. Was there a product in this build that you'd like to get your hands on? Well, we can help each other out. You can find links of products down in the description, and if you click those links and make a purchase, I get paid a small commission at no cost to you. Thank you. Did you know I have an eBay store where I sell new and vintage model kits? Check out my ever-changing inventory of model kits, and you can get 10% off by using the code YouTube10 at checkout. Be sure to watch some of my other videos, including the biggest model I ever built in this two-part series of the A400M Grizzly. Thanks for watching.